It is early January of 1945. Outside, the cold European winter presses against the windows of Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. Inside, General Dwight David Eisenhower sits hunched over a desk buried under maps. But these maps no longer highlight German spearheads or tank divisions. Instead, the pencil marks and arrows now represent something far more dangerous to an army fighting across a continent. They show fracture lines within his own alliance. At first glance, it looks like he is planning a new offensive, but Eisenhower is not planning a battle against Germany. He is trying to stop his coalition from coming apart in the middle of a war they are just months away from winning. What is about to unfold is one of the least known yet most dangerous political and military crises of the Western Front. And if Eisenhower fails to manage it, millions of soldiers will pay the price, the Allied armies will split apart, and the war in Europe will grind into chaos. This is WWII Silent Valor, and before we go any further into this high-stakes story of pride, strategy, and leadership under fire, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. These stories take a ton of research to bring to life for you, and your support keeps this channel growing. If you enjoy deep World War II storytelling that focuses on little-known but crucial turning points, you're in the right place. Now, back to Eisenhower. Only hours earlier, his British Field Marshal had stood before a crowd of reporters and with no notes and no restraint, set off a political explosion. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had just claimed public credit for saving American forces during the Battle of the Bulge. To British ears, his words might have sounded like a factual report of how he managed the northern sector of the battle, but to American ears, they sounded like arrogance, disrespect, and theft of honor. The most senior American generals were furious, and some were threatening to resign. Bernard Montgomery was now demanding permanent command of more than 500,000 American troops. Dwight Eisenhower was no longer fighting the German army. He was fighting his own alliance's anger. On one side, volcanic American fury. On the other, pompous British insistence wrapped in calm logic. Both sides had a point. Both sides believed they were right. Neither side could have what they wanted. Eisenhower needed a solution that would satisfy no one, but keep everyone in the war long enough to win it. To understand how dangerous this moment was, we need to go back just a few days. It is January 7th of 1945 in the small Belgian town of Zonhoven. Inside Montgomery's headquarters, the air is tense as cameras and journalists prepare their equipment. The British Field Marshal enters the room with the attitude and style of a man who believes he has just managed a difficult crisis. He wears a double-badged maroon beret, a parachute harness, and speaks with total confidence. His stated goal is to defend Eisenhower from criticism in the British press, which had suggested that relying on American manpower to fight the German counterattack was a mistake. But what Montgomery actually does is ignite one of the worst command crises of the entire Western Front. For an hour, Montgomery talks without notes. He describes how German forces broke through American lines in the Ardennes. He outlines how he took charge of 2 American armies in the northern sector. He praises American soldiers and compliments Eisenhower. But the structure of his speech makes it clear who he believes organized the defense and who he believes failed until he arrived. American newspapers do not quote what Montgomery actually said. Instead, they quote what it sounded like. Headlines scream that Montgomery claims he saved American forces from disaster. Veterans groups demand answers, politicians demand explanations, and the most dangerous reaction comes from Eisenhower's closest American Army Group commander, General Omar Bradley. Bradley sends word to Eisenhower that he will resign rather than continue serving under any command structure that allows this kind of insult to American soldiers. For the American troops who had survived the freezing forests and brutal fighting of the Ardennes, Montgomery's words land like a second attack. They had bled, suffered frostbite, been shelled, and fought in conditions that broke men mentally and physically. To be told publicly that a British field marshal rescued them while they fell apart was not just offensive, it was a betrayal of their sacrifice. Eisenhower drafts orders to relieve Montgomery. He is hours away from firing the most famous British general on the Western Front. But at that moment, Montgomery's chief of staff, Major General Freddie de Guingand, arrives at Supreme Headquarters and learns how bad the damage truly is. He warns Montgomery that his career is one step away from ending. When he returns to Zonhoven, he forces Montgomery to write an apology. On January 8th of 1945, Montgomery officially apologizes. He does not apologize because he believes he was wrong. He apologizes because his own subordinate has told him that failure to apologize will end his command forever. The apology prevents Eisenhower from firing Montgomery, but it does nothing to fix the damage. American commanders still feel humiliated. General Bradley still refuses to accept permanent British control over American armies. And General George Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, learns what is happening and tells Bradley that, if necessary, he will resign alongside him. Patton's armored columns had swung north to strike the German advance from the south, racing through snowstorms and ice to relieve Bastogne. His forces had done the fighting and the dying, and now Montgomery was claiming credit. For Patton, this was the final straw. He had turned an army 90 degrees in a blizzard, fought through impossible weather, and broken the German offensive. Hearing that a British field marshal was taking credit pushed him beyond patience. The threat of losing both Bradley and Patton would collapse the American command structure instantly. Other American generals would follow. Britain and the United States would no longer be partners. They would be rivals fighting parallel wars on the same continent, and that would hand Adolf Hitler his greatest victory since 1940. To understand how Montgomery got into this position, we must look at the arrangement during the Battle of the Bulge. When the German surprise attack tore through the Ardennes in mid-December of 1944, Eisenhower temporarily placed two American armies under Montgomery. The U.S. First Army under Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges and the U.S. Ninth Army under Lieutenant General William Simpson combined more than 500,000 American soldiers. Operationally, this made sense. The German attack split Bradley's army group in half, and Montgomery's headquarters was closer to the northern sector. It was a temporary measure to restore order until the crisis passed. Eisenhower saw it as necessary. Montgomery saw it as opportunity. Within days of his disastrous press conference, Montgomery meets Eisenhower at Supreme Headquarters. He arrives with calm confidence, as though nothing unusual has happened. He presents his case formally and directly. Keep First Army and Ninth Army under his command permanently, concentrate Allied forces in the north, punch through to the Ruhr industrial region, and end the war by May. He argues military logic. The broad front strategy, favored by American generals, spreads resources across too many sectors. The Southern American armies make limited progress through the difficult terrain near Saarbrücken. Concentrate everything in the north under unified command, and the war will end quickly. British forces are exhausted after 5 years of war. Canadian divisions are under strength. American manpower is essential for breakthrough operations. Montgomery believes history will prove him right. But politics does not care about being right. It cares about relationships, authority, pride, and legitimacy. Bradley had already told Eisenhower in brutal clarity what would happen if Montgomery kept those armies permanently. Bradley would not accept it. He would not serve as an army group commander with no armies to command. He would not watch Montgomery use American resources to pursue British strategic objectives while taking credit for American victories. Bradley had commanded these armies since Normandy. They were his men. Eisenhower's decision to place them temporarily under Montgomery made sense during the Bulge. Making that arrangement permanent was politically impossible. George Patton supports Bradley completely. The threat of losing both generals would trigger a cascade. American colonels, brigadier generals, division commanders, and corps commanders would refuse to serve under British strategy. The alliance would fracture. The war would be jeopardized. Winston Churchill had feared this moment since 1942. Now it is here. Eisenhower understands what Bradley is telling him. Keep Montgomery happy, or keep the American generals loyal. He cannot do both. Shortly after learning of the crisis, Churchill calls Eisenhower. He understands the stakes perfectly. If Eisenhower strips Montgomery of all American armies, British influence over Allied strategy ends. After 5 years of war, Britain will finish as a junior partner. But if Eisenhower gives Montgomery what he wants, American generals will resign and the alliance will collapse. Neither outcome is acceptable. Churchill proposes a compromise. Let Montgomery keep Ninth Army, return First Army to Bradley. This gives Montgomery enough American strength for a Rhine crossing while returning most forces to American command. It maintains British relevance without triggering an American revolt. Eisenhower accepts the framework. It is the solution he needs, but Eisenhower adds a crucial condition that Churchill does not mention. He calls Montgomery in to explain the decision. Churchill's compromise is the foundation. One American army for Montgomery, one American army returned to Bradley. But Eisenhower makes the arrangement temporary. First Army returns to Bradley immediately. Ninth Army remains under Montgomery only for the Rhine crossing operation. After the Rhine is crossed, Ninth Army returns to American control. Montgomery asks when exactly the transfer will happen. Eisenhower answers that it will depend on operational circumstances, but it will happen. Montgomery protests, arguing that long-term planning requires knowing which forces he controls. Eisenhower repeats that the decision is final. Montgomery now faces his own choice: accept this reduced arrangement or lose both armies immediately, keep one army temporarily, or command only British and Canadian forces for the remainder of the war. Montgomery accepts. On January 17th of 1945, 1st Army officially returns to Bradley's 12th Army Group. Lieutenant General Hodges now reports to Bradley, not Montgomery. 2 months later, the next phase begins. On March 22nd of 1945, General Patton's Third Army reaches the Rhine near Oppenheim. Without waiting for grand ceremonies or elaborate plans, Patton seizes the moment. Within hours, the 5th Infantry Division crosses the river. Patton telephones Bradley and tells him to tell the world Third Army crossed first before Montgomery starts his engines. Patton's crossing is reckless only to those who do not understand Patton. To those who do, it is typical. Rapid movement, exploitation of enemy weakness, minimal preparation, maximum speed. Montgomery hears about it and is furious. To him, the Rhine demands proper preparation, massive planning, and overwhelming force. But Patton proves something important. The Rhine can be crossed without Montgomery's elaborate planning if an opportunity exists and a commander is willing to take the risk. The next day, on March 23rd of 1945, British and American units under Montgomery launch Operation Plunder. It is a massive, deliberate undertaking. More than 300,000 Allied troops participate. 9th Army attacks from the southern sector while British and Canadian units push across the river. Airborne divisions leap from the sky to seize key positions. Artillery pounds German defenses. And by March 25th of 1945, Allied forces advance beyond the Rhine and into Germany itself. Montgomery declares the operation a complete success. He tells his staff that 9th Army is essential to operations beyond the Rhine. His staff submits plans for continuing the advance into northern Germany. The plans include 9th Army forces. Montgomery argues that removing 9th Army now would disrupt operations. The Ruhr encirclement requires unity of command. 9th Army's position is essential. Transferring the army now would be military stupidity. Eisenhower sees what Bradley predicted weeks earlier. Montgomery is using operational necessity to extend his command indefinitely. Every operation leads to another that supposedly requires keeping 9th Army under British control. The irony is painful for American commanders. The previous autumn, Patton had been starved of fuel in September to support Montgomery's Market Garden offensive. That offensive failed. Now Montgomery wants to control American resources again. Bradley tells Eisenhower, "The time has come." Montgomery had his Rhine crossing. It succeeded. Now return the army as promised. On April 4th of 1945, 9th Army officially returns to Bradley's 12th Army Group. The decision is final. Montgomery now commands only British and Canadian forces for the remainder of the war. Montgomery protests to Churchill, arguing that the removal damages his advance into northern Germany. He insists 9th Army has been essential to every operation since the Rhine crossing. Removing it now makes no military sense. Churchill does not intervene. The political cost is too high. Britain's influence over Allied strategy has been declining since D-Day. American manpower, industry, and logistics dominate Europe. This is the final admission that American armies will be commanded by Americans. Under Bradley, General Simpson's 9th Army continues advancing into Germany. They link up with Soviet forces at the Elbe River later in April. The Army Montgomery wanted to keep plays its role in the final victory under American command. Montgomery's 21st Army Group advances into northern Germany with only British and Canadian troops. Eisenhower's compromise was not just political bridge building, it was a strategic test. By letting Montgomery keep one army temporarily, Eisenhower proved that even with American strength, Montgomery's methodical approach was slower than American mobile warfare. Patton crossed the Rhine first with no preparation. American armies moved faster into Germany. Montgomery, even with 9th Army, could not match Patton's speed. The gamble was risky for Eisenhower. 4 months earlier, Montgomery's Operation Market Garden had failed, despite intelligence warnings he ignored. Montgomery called that failure 90% successful and faced no consequences. When he tried to keep 9th Army permanently after the Rhine crossing, Eisenhower had justification to take it away. Montgomery had been given his chance with overwhelming force and detailed planning. Now American armies would finish the war using American operational methods. Coalition warfare requires trust. Montgomery destroyed that trust in a press room. By choosing ego over alliance, he lost the trust of the men he needed most. Eisenhower gave him enough rope to prove himself. Montgomery tried to use it to extend British command indefinitely. The result was predictable. In the end, Montgomery's vision of a great northern thrust to Berlin did not die in a German ambush. It died when he stood before reporters and implied he saved American forces from themselves. On January 18th, Churchill stands before the House of Commons and swallows a bitter pill. He publicly admits that American troops have done almost all the fighting and suffered almost all the losses. It is a humiliating moment for British pride. It is also a recognition of how much the world has changed since 1939. Eisenhower's compromise keeps the alliance intact, but it also documents the end of British strategic primacy. The final victory in Europe will be won by American armies using American methods. Montgomery's press conference did not destroy the alliance, but it accelerated a transformation already underway. If you found this story engaging, informative, and eye-opening, drop a comment below and tell us what moment surprised you the most. And if you have friends or family who love history or military strategy, share this video with them. It helps the channel grow and it sparks great conversations. Thank you for watching WW2 Silent Valor, and I'll see you in the next one.